You, Stephen. I'm Mike. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is April 23rd, 1985. And for that, I'm grateful. Again, thanks for inviting me to share tonight. Stephen said before the meeting, he told me I could pretty much, I have the floor and I can talk about whatever I want. So I think what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of my experience. Um, very little about what it was like, a lot about what happened and what it's like today, but also uh, Bill Wilson to 86 years ago tonight was drunk, and he was at the end of his last spree, getting ready to go into Towns Hospital where the great miracle happened in his life. And for those of you that don't know the miracle, I'm going to share that miracle before I give my story. And Bill was laying in the hospital, and the gentleman that had come to see him just a short time before that at his home was standing in the doorway. His name was Ebby. And Bill looked and he thought, why isn't this guy out looking for a job? He needs work. And his very next thought was, here's a man who practices what he preaches. Come on in, Ebby, he said, and Ebby came in, and Bill looked at him and said, Ebby, could you please acquaint me again with that little formula that you shared with me in my home? And Ebby said, Bill, you have to be completely deflated. You have to be licked. You have to surrender. You have to believe in some sort of God. Even if you do this as an experiment, but to be willing to write out kind of an inventory, a moral scorecard of the things that you have done. Make a confession to another human being and to God. Pay restitutions for the harms done and work with others. Carry this message to another person and do this for free. We give unselfishly with no expectation of reward. Ebby left the room that morning, and Bill said that he fell into the darkest depression he had ever experienced in his life. And in the depth of that depression, he cried out as a child, if there's a God, show himself. And he said the room lit up a bright white light. He felt like he was on a mountaintop. And he could feel the breeze of the Spirit blowing through and through. And he knew he had been released. And Bill didn't use the word released in the writing of the book when he told his story, but throughout his life, when he talked about the visit that Ebby made to him in the hospital, he talked about once he had that spiritual experience, that profound spiritual awakening, he knew he had been released. And I think that tonight as we talk, I hope you'll reflect on whoever brought you to Alcoholics Anonymous and was there when you got there and extended the hand of kindness and consideration that was extended to you at your first meeting, whether that was on Zoom or at a live meeting in person. We still extend that hand of kindness to people who come to the meetings for the first time on Zoom. But maybe we can reflect about those folks and how they allowed us to have our release. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and my mother was a member of Al-Anon. I don't remember my dad's drinking. He got sober when I was very young. His sponsor, Art B. from East Aurora, New York, got sober December 26th of 1941. And he's the one that carried the message to my dad. And he and my dad carried the message to many, many alcoholics. Growing up in that home, it was a constant house of AA. The New York State Police would drop drunks off at our house and put them to bed on our front porch. And my mom would fix meals. We were getting ready for school. And my mom used to love to tell the story. We had 7 kids in our family. My little sister, Mary, was getting ready for school one morning, and there was a drunk sitting at the kitchen table shaking and whining and complaining about how remorseful and how bad he felt. And he's just carrying on. Oh, I can't believe that I did this. Oh, I can't believe that I'm in this jam again. Oh, I'm so... Finally, my 8-year-old sister looked at him and said, "We've seen way worse than you." And that was pretty much what it was like growing up, because we never knew what we were going to walk into. It might be tears because someone committed suicide the night before, and it might be a house full of people eating donuts, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, and talking AA. But it was constant. This was the environment I grew up in. By the time I was a young teenager, I want to apologize. Well, I'm not going to apologize. I'm just going to say, for some reason, recently when I'm speaking on the Zoom meetings, and I don't know why this is, but I get to my story and I'm not able to contain my emotions like I would at a conference or something like that. So if I start bawling my eyes out tonight, guys, that's why I'm just letting you know that it could happen. But anyway, I started drinking very young, and I never drank for any reason other than the effect produced by alcohol. I'm going to just tell you that that's why I drank. I drank as often as I could, as much as I could, and I did all of the other things that I could do that were available to me to do to get me out of me. The result of that was I made my first detox in Children's Hospital, and that was 1975. And while I was in the hospital, my dad's AA friends called on me. And every time they would call, they would visit with me and they would talk to me and they would encourage me to go to AA when I get out of the hospital. And I agreed to do that. I also agreed to go to counseling. And when I got out, I started going to counseling. I remember it was Tuesday afternoons because I loved Tuesdays. I was always looking forward to Tuesdays. I don't know if my parents knew why, but it was because the counselor and I were smoking weed together. And I kept going, man, is it Tuesday yet? I just wanted to go to counseling, you know. And I went to my first AA meeting around the same time, and it was in the bottom of a police station in Orchard Park, New York. It was my dad's home group. It's called the Hillbilly Group. They still meet there at 9:00 on Friday nights. We walked down into the basement. They had the long wooden tables. Back then you could smoke in buildings, and it was a smoke-filled room. The ceilings were low, and I just remember there was an awful lot of smoke in that room. And they went around the room that night and they introduced themselves. I'm Bob, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Dorothy, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Jim, I'm an alcoholic. And it came to me and I said, I'm Mike, and I'm a problem drinker with alcoholic tendencies. And the reason I said that was because I didn't want to be an alcoholic. And the truth was, it wasn't because I looked down on alcoholics. It was because I felt like if I admitted that I was an alcoholic, that somehow I was implying that I was going to quit drinking. And at 15 years old, I could not wrap myself around not drinking the rest of my life. And I was very honest about that with my dad. And I would say, man, you guys, I can't do this. You know, it doesn't even make sense. And he would say, oh, don't worry, Bob. It's the first drink that gets you drunk. And I'd be going, that's what I don't understand. How can you say it's the first drink that gets you drunk? That doesn't even make sense. And you call yourself an alcoholic. I don't get drunk till like the fourth drink or the eighth drink. And I would always try to justify it. And finally he says, Mike, if you were going to get killed by a train and you're on the railroad tracks and a train hits you, would it be the engine that kills you or would it be the caboose that kills you? And I thought, and I said, well, why am I on the train track? See, I always had an answer for everything. It wasn't enough. No matter how well someone explained something to me, I had this terminal uniqueness. I was different. It wasn't enough. No matter what you did, it wasn't enough. People would bail me out and give me money and places to live and buy my food and give me clothes and take care of me and help me get a job. And then when something would go wrong, I would blame them for not doing enough. And I would try to justify my behavior based on my intentions. I never got up in the morning thinking I was going to go out and do the things that I did. But yet at the end of the day, those were the things that I did. And I repeated it over and over and over. I had a couple failed attempts at suicide. I got to visit some psychiatric hospitals and many detox wards. I had never been into treatment. The closest I came was in the detox. And I think part of that was the finances, and part of it may have been my mother and father's relationship with Alcoholics Anonymous at the time. So that never happened. But I remember one time a girl was doing an intake at the psychiatric hospital, and I was probably about 23, 24 years old at the time. It was toward the end of my drinking. And I was, as she's asking me the typical intake questions, I'm trying to convince her that a life with me would be a good move on her part. And this is in a psychiatric hospital. So that was how I came to you. You know, my last drink, I'll share that because I think it's you know, it makes sense now. It didn't then. I had called my dad. Well, okay, I broke into a house and I was going to commit suicide. And I couldn't find the guy's gun, so I was going to jump out the window. So I'm in the attic of this house looking out the window, and I am as sick as I've ever been in my life. And I see these 3 black women walking down the street wearing these funny church hats. Now, I don't know if it was a hallucination. It may have been. But for some reason, when I saw them, I thought of my grandmother and the God of my childhood, and I got down on my knees in that room by myself that morning and asked God to help me. And the room didn't light up a bright light. And I did not feel as though I was on a mountaintop. But I think a series of events began to happen in the unseen at that time as a result of that prayer. And part of what happened was I called my dad later that night. And because I knew he'd answer the phone, he asked me where I was. I told him. He agreed to meet me the next day. Him and another member of Alcoholics Anonymous called on me in a diner. We sat there. We talked about my options. I didn't have any options, but no options left. At that point in time, I had failed at attempting suicide. I was hopelessly in debt. I was broke. I had nowhere to live. And any reasonable person would not answer my call. And I'm sitting across the table, and it was decided that I should go in for detox, and then they were going to try to figure it out from there. And I went over to the Erie County Medical Center the next day. They had called ahead. The admissions counselor came out of out into the lobby of the waiting room, and he put his hands up and he said, "You can't come in here. You need to leave. We can't help you. You've been here too many times." And I honestly felt like the gates of hell had crashed. I was so sick. I was so afraid. I just didn't know what I could possibly do. And the only solution that I had was a drink. And I walked out where my brother's car was when he dropped me off was a taxi cab. And I got in the cab and I said, "Take me to a bar." And it was a beautiful sunny afternoon. And you can always remember beautiful sunny afternoons in the springtime in Buffalo because they're kind of rare. This was April 23rd. And I'm sitting there having a drink, and the door of the bar was open, and a city bus pulled up, and a lady fell on the ground when she was trying to get on the bus. And I walked out of that bar right to that woman, and I helped her up, and I helped her get on the bus. And I followed her on the bus. And from that day to this day, I've not had to go back and pick up that drink. Now, that story is significant for me for several reasons. One, I do and have done a tremendous amount of studying of AA history, and I've authored some books, and I'm not here to talk about any of that or my website. What I'm here to talk to you about is my alcoholism, my membership in AA, and my recovery. But as I was studying Bill Wilson's life, I was always just so fascinated by his bright white light experience that he had in the hospital. And here I am, I'm about 18 years sober, and I've got a good life, but I'm getting ready to write a book, and I'm studying Bill, and I'm thinking that I'm getting messed up here because I didn't have a profound spiritual experience, and I was really looking for that. And shortly after that, I had another issue, and I'm going to share this. I don't usually do it this way, but I woke up in the morning and I had a concern. And then I thought about it and it became a problem. And then I thought about the problem and it became a crisis. And then I thought about the crisis and I was immobilized and petrified and just couldn't move. And the thing is nothing changed other than I thought about my concern for 2 minutes. Nothing changed other than my thinking. So I called my sponsor. I went to see him. We sat in a booth in Denny's and I gave him my crisis. And he looks back at me and he says, your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. And I'm like, wait a minute. He clearly didn't hear what I had to say because I got a lot of stuff going on here and I need some answers. So being a salesperson, I kind of repositioned what I had to say and gave it to him from a slightly different angle, figuring this time Howard was going to give me a response that would be at least satisfactory. So I gave it to him again. He looks at me and he says, your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. This happened one more time. And then I think he could see that I was getting pretty frustrated. And he said, Mike, if you go back through your life as far back as you can go, and you look at all the circumstances and events that have occurred so far, what you'll see is the times that you were afraid, what you were afraid of pretty much never happened. When you really wanted something bad and you didn't get it, what you got turned out to be better than what you wanted. And you'll see how God has pulled a golden thread through each and every one of these circumstances and events that have led you to this moment right now. I went home and I began to follow his instructions. Now, the reason that he gave me those instructions is he wanted me to look at the evidence of my own experience and know that God had been working in my life. And because of my evidence of the experience of my life, I could trust the next steps that I was going to take, that they were going to be all right, and they truly were going to unfold into goodness. So I went home and I began to do the exercise. Bill Wilson says it a little bit different in the 12 and 12. He says, our principal means of communication with God is self-examination, prayer, and meditation. When these three things are logically interwoven, they create an unshakable foundation for life. When these three things are logically interwoven, they create an unshakable foundation for life. When I came to AA, I wanted a job, a girlfriend, and a place to live. And I would have taken a girl that had a job and a place to live, and I would have been happy. I was not looking for an unshakable foundation for life. If they would have told me that, I may have run. I don't know how I would have responded, but I am so grateful that that's in the 12 and 12 and that Howard gave me that lesson to do. And I began to do this self-examination in a way I'd never done it. And when I got to the point where I helped that lady get on the bus, I asked myself a question. And that question was simple. Why didn't you kick her, take her purse, and run? Because that's the kind of punk I had become. I didn't do that. I believe that prayer that I had said the night before alone in that room, that God began to work in my life at that time and to line things up for things to be the way that they were. And I could see the guy in the hospital putting his hands up as a blessing and not a curse. There was no resentment. There was love for that man. He was part of the divine order that led me to this wonderful program of Alcoholics Anonymous and gifted me with sobriety one day at a time. My dad didn't know what to do with me. And he called his friend down in Texas, a guy named John Carlton. And John got sober October 28, 1951. John had a sponsor named Dick Breen. Dick got sober in 1941, and Dick's sponsor was Bill Wilson. And John said, send the kid down here for 2 weeks. We'll see if he wants the deal. And they stuck me on an airplane and sent me down to Texas. And I was greeted at the airport by Big John. John was like 6'9" or something. He was a big man. And he was 80 years old. And he was just the most wonderful human being on the planet. I got to his house that night, and I kind of remember him pacing. And they were always wearing suit jackets. All these old AA guys wore suit jackets all the even when they weren't doing AA and stuff, So John's like pacing this night. And I remember him looking down at me. I'm sitting on the couch and he says, how long you been around the deal, kid? And he always called me kid. He never called me by my name. I don't think even once. He had another name for me, but Howard asked me not to share that when I'm speaking at AA. So, but we're going to just stick with kid. And he says, how long you been around the deal, kid? And with as much ego as you can have when you weigh 90 pounds, everything you own is a cardboard box, and you're wearing someone else's pants. I said, oh, about 10 years. He looked at me and he said, I don't know if you have the guts it takes to make it. I don't know if you have the guts it takes to make it. We separate the men from the boys. And if you want to get sober, I'll go to hell and back with you. And if you don't, you can go to hell alone. I'm like waiting for welcome to Texas. The next thing that he said to me changed my life forever. He said, you were nothing but a thief. Maybe not the kind of thief that'd kick in a joint or steal money from his mother's purse. He said, you are a worse thief than that. He said, because you stole from those you love the most their right to happiness. I got to tell you, that was one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic, and he had a message that had depth and weight. And when he told me I was nothing more than a thief, and a thief of the worst kind, for the first time in my life, I had no comeback. It was as though he entered the cave of darkness and grabbed me by the hand, and he began to lead me out to the sunlight of the Spirit. And I know he did that because that's what was done for him. Because you see, this is a program of service where we give of ourselves to others without expectation. We don't look for a payback. We do it because it's what we need to do for our own survival. And as grateful as I am to Big John for the wisdom and the words and the time and the love and the encouragement, as grateful as I am for that, I know that in some way I helped him stay sober and have a better life. He invited me down for 2 weeks. I did everything alcoholically. I stayed for 2 years. I stayed with him for 2 years. I drove him to conferences all over the country and Canada. And while I was driving, and he'd be reading to me, or we'd be listening to recordings. And it was all AA. And then he'd quiz me. What's Dr. Bob's address, kid? It was almost like I was supposed to one day do some things with AA history. I did not know that God was pulling a golden thread through my life and the relationships that I had with these guys. My first morning in Texas, John comes into the bedroom and he wakes on. I got to tell you that too. He had a 1-bedroom apartment. He gave me the bed. I stayed for 2 years. Somebody will say, where did he sleep? I don't know. I didn't care. I was so self-centered, I never even thought about it. My first 2 years, I was still just thinking about me constantly. Anyway, we would be driving, we'd be doing these conferences, and he would be sharing this stuff with me, and then he'd be quizzing me. But my very first day in Texas, he wakes me up in the morning. And he says, come on, kid, we got things to do, places to go, people to see. We got to go. Come on, kid, get up, let's go. And I'm like, you're 80. I don't know anybody in Texas. This is not that important. Anyway, after a while, I began to loosen up. I began to just, be okay, doing whatever he was suggesting. So that morning, we pull into the driveway down in Brownwood, Texas, at the Midwest Tape Library, Bill and Arbutus O'Neill. And we got to the house, and John says, kid, this is the largest AA tape library in the world. I'm like, so? Who cares? I mean, I just had no interest. And we get there, and we go inside, and Bill and Arbutus, just the most lovely people in the world, but Bill had one eye and one arm. And when I saw him, and he was wearing a suit jacket and smoking a pipe, and I immediately nicknamed him, secretly now, Grumpy. Okay. Well, then we go in, and this library, like just the whole building is full of AA and Al-Anon archives. It is just packed filled. And I have a little kitchen table, maybe something similar to what's at Stepping Stones. And we would drink instant coffee. And we went there every day. And we would sit there and we'd drink this instant coffee. And these guys would talk about Alcoholics Anonymous and history. And they introduced me to people like Smitty, Dr. Bob's son, and Circe, and David A., and all the guys that were alive in Texas at the time. And they would drag me all over. But, we're sitting there on that first morning, the way I remember it. And John and Bill and Arbutus are talking, and they may have been talking about Bill Dotson, who John got to meet, or Sister Ignatia, who they knew well, or Smitty, or any of these folks. And I thought it was my turn because I just, I was sitting there and I just thought, I might as well contribute to the conversation. I had a couple of days sober. So what I didn't tell you is my vocabulary at that time was a lot different than it is today. I was limited to about 7-word sentences, and I said one of my sentences, and 3 of them started with F. And Bill didn't like that, and he started banging one of his fingers down on the table and glaring at me with one of his eyes. And he said, "Kid, the first thing we clean up in here is our mouth." And I'm thinking, oh my God, grumpy. So we left a little while after that. And by then I knew Big John because he had visited my family over the years. And anytime he was up that way, he would come spend time at our home. So we got out to his car and I said, what's up with Grumpy? You guys are going to try to tell me how to speak now? I can't use bad words? What's up with that? He says, well, kid, you might be the only big book that some new guy or some new girl sees coming into the program. You might be the first example of Alcoholics Anonymous that they see. And you see, AA saved our lives, and it might save yours. And we knew Bill and Lois, and he went through a little list, and he said, and the people who paved the way so that we could be sober. And what Bill wants you to do is to have a little respect for the work that they did. From that day to this, I haven't found it necessary to use that language in any meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that, some people say, well, that's old-fashioned. I'm only giving my story here. I'm not giving an opinion or telling anybody what to do. And I sure as heck am not qualified to talk for Alcoholics Anonymous, okay? Only thing I'm qualified to do is share my story in a general way. I often have to think about the dollar bill story. I went talked to Howard about something one day, and he decided he wanted to share with me an experience that he and his wife had, and they were having a fight one morning, and then Howard had to go to work, but the fight wasn't done. So the fight continued in his head, and he was sober just a short period of time, and his wife had started to go to Al-Anon. And he came home from work that day, and he's ready to finish the fight. He had everything figured out that he wanted to say. He was well armed. And he walks in the house, and he's ready to start. And Pat looks at him and says, "Oh, Howard, my sponsor was over today, and I let her know about our disagreement this morning. And I just want you to know that you were right." And Howard's like, "What? Wait a minute." His whole day he had invested in this battle that he had to win. And she's like, you were right. And he looks at her and he's like, doesn't even know what to do. And then she said, "And so was I." And she says, "Howard, if I hold a dollar bill between you and you describe what you see, and I describe what I see, we both describe 2 entirely different versions of the exact same thing." That's all it was, is your opinion and my opinion of the same thing. Boy, I'll tell you, I'm so grateful for the wisdom of the people like Howard and Big John. And when I was getting sober, I was an angry guy. I don't know why I was angry. I was angry because you didn't give me enough. That's the only thing I can think, looking back on my life. The only thing I could possibly be angry about is that somebody didn't give me enough, because I was just about taking. I was about getting from you. Okay? And I was constantly complaining and saying that I was going to get even. I'll get even. I'll get even. You'll see. And finally John says, kid, if you're going to get even with someone, why don't you try to get even with someone that's been good to you? And I have spent the last 35 years trying to do that. And I want you to know that I don't think I can live long enough to get even to the people that have been good to me. I don't think that there's enough days in my life that I could ever come close to getting even with the people who have been good to me. I can tell you this, when I'm asked to do something, if I need to travel across town or get on an airplane or do something to help another alcoholic, I have a track record that'll back it up. I do it. But I don't share that in any ego sense. I share that because this man gave up his bed for 2 years. I'm certain he was inconvenienced to help me get sober. And I can tell you there are times where I have been inconvenienced to try to help someone else get sober. And I feel blessed because of it. I know there have been times where Joy and I were walking out the door for a meeting or a dinner or an appointment. My phone rang. And she look at me and she knows right away that I got to go, that this is important. And that's what is. And that's how I've learned to carry the message. And I'm grateful that God put people in my life, like my wife, Joy, who can support that and help me along the way. You know, I learned through the process of the 12 steps that by adapting and living by the principles that are outlined in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and by attending meetings and hearing your stories, and you share your experience and your hope with me, I've learned how to respond to the problems of living and not react. And that's probably been one of the greatest blessings in my life. You know, if you go to the doctor because you have a rash and they put some ointment on it, and the next day you got the rashes all over your body, you go back to the doctor and they go, oh, you're having a reaction. But if you go back and it's gone, the first thing they say is, oh, you've responded well. And you know, Bill Wilson's spiritual guide sponsor was a non-alcoholic Jesuit priest named Father Ed Dowling from St. Louis, Missouri. And Father Ed spoke at the Second International, which I think I have a picture of. I think that's what I have the picture of tonight. But he spoke in St. Louis at the Second International Convention. And in his talk, he said, this is a Catholic priest. If he ever makes it to heaven, it will be because he backed away from hell. I have let that be a mantra in my life to keep me away from things that would cause me problems. You know, when I was getting sober, they would say, don't go to wet places, don't hang out with wet people, and this kind of, and I just applied these tools to my daily life. If you want to be married, you don't do things that'll keep you from being married, you know, behaviors and attitudes. And you know, Bill Wilson wrote the 12 traditions, and the first tradition, our common welfare comes first. Personal recovery depends upon a unity. And that tradition is all about personal sacrifice, as is the other traditions. And the benefit to this alcoholic for that is I've been in situations in my home and in my businesses throughout my life where I've had to sacrifice my desire to have my way so that I can create unity. And because of that, and because God has blessed me with a wonderful wife, so I was leaving Big John. I've been there 2 years. It's time to move on. I had a friend in Arizona. I called him up. He invited me to work for him and offered me a place to live. And I told John, hey, Pete's going to get me a job at this construction thing, and he's going to give me a place to live, and I'm going to be connected. I already know some people there. He's, go, kid, good, go. I think he was ready to have his bed back. But I went and I started doing this. I was a laborer for a construction company, and I'm carrying drywall in 150-degree weather in Phoenix. And one day I'm out by the pool. I'd only been doing it for a few weeks, but long enough that I was getting a few muscles, and starting to feel good about myself. And I could be at the pool without a shirt on. I couldn't open my mouth because all my teeth were rotted, but I could at least be there without a shirt, And this girl dives in the water. Well, hell, I dove in the water after her. And she told me her name was Joy. And I thought, I need more joy in my life. And I told her my name was Mike. And I'm an alcoholic. And I think I gave her about the 30-minute pitch of Bob White's talk or something, whatever I most recently listened to on cassette, because at that point in time, I was still spending about 4 hours a day listening to AA recordings every single day. And I did that for years. Well, we went out on a date and she got her fortune cookie, and the fortune said, "You can trust the man you're with. His love is true." She lived in Michigan. I lived in Arizona. We continued our relationship through writing letters and talking on the telephone. And 4 months later, we were married. We got married on December 28th. So this December 28th will make 33 years for us to be married. How does that happen? The only thing I know about relationships before I came into AA, I could put it in one word, and that was pathetic, man. I never had a relationship with another human being that had any kind of love, any kind of courtesy, or any kind of compassion or empathy. It just didn't exist. And of course, when you get married and you're doing AA and you're buying homes and start to work, and we started having kids. We had 3 children. And my oldest just had him and his wife had a baby 2 months ago. So, I get to love him. And my daughter, Emily, some of you that have known me for a while know Emily has had severe health issues for many years, and she lives with us, and she's continuing to battle her health issues. And we're proud of her. We love her, and we pray that she will have a quality of life. I was speaking in Myrtle Beach, and I came back a number of years ago. It was 8 or 9 years ago now. And I was out in the garage cleaning up, and next thing you know, I hear some noise, and I look at the corner of my eye, and I see people running at my garage. And my instinct was to run. And I ran into the house. And as I did, I held the door open so that they wouldn't bash it down with a battering ram that they had in their hands and their guns drawn. And I was laying on my floor in handcuffs while they were arresting my son for dealing drugs. And while I was laying there on the floor in handcuffs, the thought came to me. And that thought was this: your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. God is pulling a golden thread through your life. The very next thought that I had was, his life is in divine order also. He got sober. He was 17 years old. And today he's got 8+ years sober. He's married, 2 children, doing a wonderful job, and is of service constantly to alcoholics and drug addicts. I couldn't be more proud. But life comes at us, and we learn how to respond to these things. So instead of me trying to control his sobriety and give him direction as the great AA, I was able to be nothing more than a cheerleader. That's all I did for Josh. I was his cheerleader. I was his biggest fan. And the reason that I was is because my parents were my cheerleader, because the people in Alcoholics Anonymous have always been my cheerleader. Okay, always. I'm not one of these guys who heard shut up and listen, any of that. What I got was encouragement constantly. Kid, would you make me breakfast? I would. He'd brag about it for the whole day. One time, I love to tell the story of when John had me make spaghetti and meatballs. And he said, can you make the meatballs round? And I'm like, well, yeah, I grew up in Buffalo. I make a snowball as good as anybody. So I got a loaf of bread and a pound of hamburger and a dozen eggs, and I mixed them all in a bowl. And I made these meatballs, and I swear to you, they were white. They were in my hand, and they actually looked like snowballs. And I fried them up in this grease, and I had some Prego or something kind of sauce I bought at the store, and I threw it in there and I cooked him some pasta. And I swear to God, guys, I got 2 weeks of compliments. Okay. I mean, he went out of his way to brag about me. I think about how I want to sponsor people today and how I attempt to sponsor people. I have never, from any of the men that I've ever sponsored, I have never looked to see what they weren't doing or what they were doing wrong. I have only looked to see what they were doing right. And I tell them that they're doing it, and I praise them for it, because that's what I got. And I got to tell you, the effect on me as a result of that was I wanted to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I wanted to be around these people. Those were the kind of people that I wanted to be with. I was sitting in the Midwest Tape Library one day, and Dr. Bob's son, Smitty, was there. And I had spent 10 years coming to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I couldn't get sober. From 15 at Children's Hospital till 25 when I crashed and burned, I went to AA regularly and in and out of detox and all that. Never got sober. I never got 30 days of continuous sobriety that entire 10 years. And I'm sitting at the table, at the kitchen table with Smitty and Arbutus. And Smitty says to me, Mike, has Bill, being Bill O'Neill, or John, talked to you about the first guy that my dad, he's talking about Dr. Bob, and Bill W. worked with? And now they've spoon-fed me enough AA history that I know about Bill Dotson, okay? So I'm going up. Oh yeah, Bill D, AA number 3, Akron City. I'm trying to impress Smitty with my knowledge. And he says, well, Mike, he says, there was actually somebody before Bill D. He said, there was a guy named Eddie, and they moved Eddie into our house. He was a neighbor, and he moved him in, and his family and dad and Bill were trying to get him sober, and he would climb down out the window, and he'd go get drunk, and they'd go get him back. And he says, one day he's chasing my mom, Ann Smith, around the house with a butcher knife, and he had to be committed. And I thought, and as he's telling me the story, because my whole life I felt like I was a disappointment, a loser, and I couldn't do it. And he said to me, Mike, the story didn't end there. 15 years later at my dad's funeral, a man came up to me and extended a hand and said, do you know who I am? And Smitty said, I looked at him, and it was Eddie. And Eddie had been sober for 2 years. And I got to tell you what happened to me. See, for that 10 years that I was coming to AA and it wasn't working for me, I felt like I failed AA. And I wasn't good enough for AA. I was a disappointment to my parents. I was a disappointment to everybody. He tells me that story, and the thought comes to my head. AA wasn't built on success. AA was an outgrowth of failure. It's guys like Eddie and guys like me and men and women like you that make AA work. It wasn't handed down. It wasn't some success story. It was a story of broken people who were being mended together because they got together and stayed together. That's why the first word in this program is we. We admit that we're powerless over alcohol. We, not I, not me. We had 7 kids in the family. My oldest brother, Jim, was 59 years old. His wife had passed away at about 54 years old, a year before this, of cancer. Jim called me. We talked. He said he had cancer. He came to visit me throughout the year. This was in 2013. Damn, long time ago. And as he was getting ready to pass, I decided I would go see him. And I went to see Howard the morning before I left. And I said, I'm going to see my brother. And it's going to be the last time that I see him. And I don't know what to say. And I'm not sure what to do. And I'm a little bit afraid. And Howard said, don't worry about it, Mike. And he said, just remember something. His life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. I got to be honest with you. I got on the airplane and I was thinking about Howard's thoughts, and I was thinking about this being the last time I was going to see my brother. And I was thinking about divine order, and I was having a little bit of trouble with it. I'm just being honest. I was having a little bit of trouble buying into his life being in divine order. And I went there and I spent a few days with him. And over the time that we spent together, we did what Bill suggests in the 11th step. We did some self-examination, some prayer and meditation. We did Howard's lesson and we looked back through his life, and we could see the circumstances and events as they unfolded, and the time that he was afraid that what he was afraid of didn't happen, and times that he sacrificed his desire to have his way. He was blessed with a feeling of spiritual oneness. He was taking care of his wife when she was sick. And it was a great lesson for me, and I left, and Jim died 2 weeks later. And I went back and gave the eulogy at his funeral and spent time with my mom. And I came back home. Now, the day I left, my mom was just short of 50 years in Al-Anon. And when I left, she was in good health. She had a little bit of a cold, and she seemed run down, probably from the funeral and taking care of Jim and all the things that had been happening. So I kind of dismissed it and didn't worry about it, went on about my way. And a week later, she was having some issues, and they put her in the hospital for observation, and her condition started to decline. Different organs started to just shut down. And she woke up one morning and she says to my brother and to my sister, "I want Mike here." So they called me. I got on I bought a ticket. I went over to Howard's, and I told Howard I'm going to go see my mom, and it's going to be the last time that I see her. And I don't know what to do. And he told me her life was in divine order, unfolding into goodness, and that God was pulling a golden thread through her life and my life, and that I should go there and thank her for her service to not only me and my son and my nephew, but to her husband and my father, and to the community and to her church, and let her know that she did a beautiful job. I was able to do that. We smiled, we held hands. We had a nice evening together, and she passed away the next day. And I was talking to some of my family members, and I had mentioned I wasn't sure why she wanted me there. And I was a little bit troubled because we had no unfinished business. And you know what? If you live your life by the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, you don't have unfinished business, because you have today. That's all we get. My sister-in-law said, she didn't want you here for her. She wanted you here for us. When I left Buffalo in April of 1985, there was nobody that wanted me there for them. And Alcoholics Anonymous gave me a life where I could be a son, where I could be a brother, and where I could be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Dr. Bob in his last talk said, if you take AA and you simmer it down to just two things, those two things would be love and service. Now, I think if Dr. Bob would have spent a little bit more time dwelling on that, he may have said, if you simmered AA down to one thing, that one thing would be love, because service is love in action. A bell is not a bell till we ring it. A song is not a song until we sing it. And love wasn't put in our hearts to stay. Love is only love when we give it away. And AA, my friends, is only AA if we give it away. So keep doing it. I love you and thank you.
Well, thank you, Mike.